Greetings and welcome to In Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. Now, immigration, race, and survival from Trinidad to Canada, living in parallel worlds. This is a book done by Cecily Alexander. Now, more than just a book, this work is a museum of her lived experience and form an evolution of her consistent writing and journaling. She joins us now to tell us more. Hello, Cecily. How are you doing?
Excellent. Thank you, Dike.
Really glad that you're able to make the time. And I'm wondering, what actually precipitated the move from Trinidad and Tobago to Canada in the first place?
Well, I finished my A-levels with the intention of probably going to UE, but my brother, who was actually at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, decided that that's the place I should move to do my degree at the University of Alberta in 1969.
I'm thinking that when those flyers actually reached through, that is one of the things that you may have been looking at, really looking to see what was happening with that space. But life in school, life outside of school, neighborhood, etc., what was it like in terms of the move from this space to that space?
Well, I really had an idyllic life in Trinidad. I would say I grew up in a middle-class family, very proud of who I was. My father played cricket for the West Indies in the 30s and 40s and was proud of my family name. I've used it in my memoir, Pouchette. And he would say, remember your Pouchette, be proud of this. And actually, because I am Cecily Pouchette and he was Cecil Pouchette, people would recognize my name and recognize my famous father. So that was one positive thing. But on both sides of the family, I came from educated and professional family members. My grandfather was a pharmacist. My great uncle was a magistrate. And I was brought up to be very proud. I was a happy, well-adjusted teenager when I immigrated to Canada.
Did those feelings of being well-adjusted, happy, proud, looking at the surname and deriving pride from that, did they remain when you migrated to Canada?
Very quickly it changed. I was job hunting and really thought, with my A-levels and good experience that I had that it would be very easy to get a job. But this came to me very quickly that this was not the case in, I would say, redneck Alberta in 1969, Canada. And a really nice gentleman. It was a Kodak booth, a very simple job. I had applied to work his cash register. And he sat me down, held my hand and said, Cecily, you're such a nice person. I would really like to give you this job, but I would lose my customers and my business because you're colored. That was exactly his words.
Wow. So how did that make you feel?
Well, I went to a bench that in the bus station and cried. And I really thought, oh, what am I doing here? I was just 19. I'm going to go back to Trinidad, to UE, where a lot of my high school mates were at the time. But I didn't. I heard somehow in my head, my mother was a very strong individual. And I heard her saying to me, don't give up. So as I said, from a very early immigration, a couple of months after I was in Canada, I began what I consider my survival skills. That's why my memoir has the term survival.
So even before talking about your memoir specifically, yes, you stayed, you persevered, you were resilient. You became a dietitian. And then outside, and then even past that, you went and you built capacity in management training. What's the reason for some of those steps, especially dietitian to management training?
Well, In terms of dietetics, I started off as a dietitian. And after about 6 years in the profession, I realized I had experienced all the different specialties. So I wanted to work in advancing in dietetics. The next step was management, and I was really interested in it. I did a part-time relief as a clinical manager. So I was at Kitchener at the time and went to Wilfrid Laurier, a very recognized business school, to start MBA courses. And I applied for jobs from that hospital to London, where I eventually moved to. I'm using the actual names with you now, but in my memoir, I've disguised those names and individuals, but feel actually quite empowered from a letter I got from one of my VPs to identify where those experiences occurred.
And I'm grateful that you can actually share that with us, because it also gives and to this conversation to help people go to your memoir to actually take it in for themselves and say, oh, I know what she's talking about. I know what this spot is. She spoke about this during this conversation. But too outspoken, aggressive. What are some of the other terms that may have been a synonym for Black or other narratives that were ascribed to you during this progression, as you would have detailed in your memoir?
I think one of the very biggest stereotypes of Blacks are that we are dishonest and we are not trustworthy. And it's really hard to overcome that stereotype. So in both, I describe two specific work settings where microaggressions were really significant. And in both of those work settings, this was an underlying theme of me not being honest or dishonest with very little proof. There's also a bit of resentment, and I mentioned this in my book in terms of trying to understand Canadian racism. Canada is thought of being so welcoming and not racist. But I really realize that the racism in Canada is very similar to the racism in the States in terms of how they view Blacks.
And are there any habits, energies, influences that you would have had from home as this 19-year-old going to Canada that you think may have actually lent to some of those narratives that were used against you?
Okay, let me think of your question. I think as I said, I was always a strong person. I am described as that. And really the challenge of overcoming, I was very confident. So I really, how should I say? I really was able to maneuver a lot of those difficulties. At first, racism was very overt, where you call names or inadvertently, not a lot, but I would say anytime you experienced a racist slight or being called the N-word or jigaboo or spook or whatever the term might be, you remember it. It's one of the things that ends up being part of who you are, But really, I saw that as mainly ignorance, which it was in the person that said it. The thing about me was the two experiences I relate in my memoir that were really significant in terms of microaggressions and microinvalidation happened within work settings by a manager to me. And those are really hard to overcome because that's the person that controls everything that you do within that job.
And in terms of controlling everything, no, I want you to speak about those two incidents, but we'll do it on the other side of the break. So stay with us. We are speaking with Cecily Alexander. We're using the full name about her memoir, her experiences. Stay with us. We'll return with more. Welcome back. We are speaking with Cecily Alexander, Immigration, Race and Survival from Trinidad to Canada, living in a parallel world. And just before we took the break, Ms. Alexander was going to talk about two such incidents that really stood out to her. So please, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Okay, so I describe in my book, or my memoir, as living in a very white world. Pretty well, the majority of my friends are white. I was married, my husband's deceased now, but I was married to a white Canadian. So it's interesting. I describe also that many of the experiences that I had that were wrong, or I would describe as racist, I would say something to one of my white friends and say, no, Cecily, it's because you're bright, or because you're so well educated or well dressed, or whatever other reason it would not be recognized as such. So I went on to not share it. I didn't share any of these circumstances after a while. And actually, I describe also that I knew some of what I was experiencing was wrong, but I didn't have the words. I just didn't know. It wasn't until 2017. I was skiing in Utah and talking to a white guide and explaining or describing one of my experiences. And he said, Cecily, those are micro invalidations or microaggressions. And I said, what? Just 2017, and I typed it into my phone. It's still there right now, and came back and researched it. And microaggressions described exactly what I was experiencing. So in the first case, this goes back as early as just before I went to university to do my MBA. So this would have been in the 1993, 94. And I had already spent 8 successful years in this hospital, university hospital, as a clinical manager, and really did a lot of exciting things to build our department and have a really functioning team. But what happened in the 90s was a lot of restructuring in healthcare. So I inherited a new manager, a nurse, not someone familiar with food services or what we did. And I describe in my memoir, this person was my nemesis. And almost why something is a microaggression or microinvalidation, from day one it started. It's not to say that she worked with me for a period of time and was monitoring what I was doing. From day one, and microaggressions are usually covert, done in private. And literally within her first week, I had a meeting with her where she explained a lot of personal things that she objected to with me, whether it was my accent, or I spoke with my hands, I was too familiar with my staff, or a word she coined by herself called team-mindedness that I had to change to survive.
And those are some of the things that I wanted to ask about in terms of asking whether or not anything that you would have brought from Trinidad and Tobago that would have been embedded in you the way that you speak. So even like speaking with your hands. I remember Paul Keys Douglas saying, if you want somebody from Trinidad and Tobago to stop talking, as opposed to covering your mouth, you tie their hands, yeah, and they're bound like that. So, but I'm also curious though to find out some of the conversations that you would have had with your husband, because I'm thinking, white male Canadian, did he see some of these things the same way? Did he understand it the same way when you would have related some of these incidents to you, saying, okay, well, I can't really necessarily put it into the exact way that I want to articulate it, but did he get that sense from you?
He didn't. The thing about Wayne was, I say in my memoir, but it's more in relation to my sons, that he didn't understand racism. And in a lot of ways, it was what I was attracted to in our relationship at the beginning. I always said that I would have found it difficult to have married a white American because I couldn't see anyone growing up in America without hearing the N-word or being part of some sort of racist experience if you were white. But my husband grew up at a farm in rural Canada, where literally there was no one Black or colored or mixed, or it was actually very, very, very white community. And it was only when he came to university that he was first exposed to people of color of different races. So in a way, I like that about Wayne. He really wasn't. He liked me for who I was. He loved Trinidad, the rum, a lot of the good things about coming home with me, my family. So when he really didn't understand or interpret what, as I said, even then too, I wasn't sure that it was who I was, because I thought some of these behaviors are not fair or not right. And in my book, I go through a lot of it being my personality. I looked at Myers-Briggs. Am I too much of an extrovert? Because I'm extrovert to the extreme in terms of my personality. And
but also going to the extreme, and apologies. Two things. I want to get the distinction between not being racist versus being anti-racist, as well as where do people find your memoirs? How do they engage with it in the 2 minutes that we have?
Okay. That was how I concluded. I concluded my memoir by saying, I want you to move from being not racist to anti-racist. And every one of my white friends, and I wrote this for a white audience, I have given that challenge, and I have tried to make everyone that I knew that is Black, is white, and that is close to me, I talk about race, and I try to explain what my book explains. But I realize how difficult it is. And I'm actually quite surprised of how many of my white friends have racist beliefs. Things like one of my neighbors said to me when I was discussing my memoir, well, Cecily, white lives matter too, and blue lives matter too. And I had to explain to her in terms of Black Lives Matter, yeah, but they're not killing whites. It's something very specific. So it's actually a lot harder to make that shift. So I haven't discussed this in my memoir, but what I am trying to establish now is what I call allyship, and white allyship, and being an accomplice. So, and these are contemporary terms, but
very important points. But where do we find your memoir?
Okay, in Trinidad, I have it at RIK, and also at the Normandy bookstore, paper-based. So those are two places I've left copies in Trinidad. But for people, I know this show is listened to in other countries. So whether it's the States or Canada or England or Australia, my book can be bought on Amazon. In the Caribbean, of course, you can buy it through Amazon, but I think postage is going to be astronomical. So you're better off buying it in Trinidad. So the copies I've left behind.
Well, we want to thank you so much. And you realize how the time flew, because this is something that we can keep on talking about in terms of there's so many individuals who have that experience themselves, or they know someone else. So like my mom is one of 8, and 4 of her siblings actually migrated to Canada, where they may have had similar experiences. I think some of them actually created the first Black steel band that there was in Canada. So these are conversations that can continue, but we want to thank you so much, Cecily Alexander, for doing this and sharing your experience with us. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth. Thank you for joining us.